Welcome to Ohio VolleyTalk. Alongside me here, Snawson, I'm Elliot Skelly. Joining us today, second-year head coach of Olentangy Berlin, Jim Cornett. How you doing, Jim?
I'm good. It's great to join you guys.
Yep, happy to have you. So, 2021, the year before you took the job, the Berlin Bears were 6-18, and they were 2-10 in the OCC Cardinal. And now, just 2 years later, in your second year on the job, 6-2, some big wins over Dublin Jerome and St. Ignatius, and probably favorites to win the OCC Cardinal right now. We'll see this week, but as of right this moment, you're probably the favorites. Can you speak to the turnaround that you had in such a short amount of time?
Yeah, it's really just a testimony to the guys that we had come in a couple years ago and their parents as well. They just work really hard. A lot of club guys. I think that was a big factor was previously at Berlin, there was maybe one or two club players total, if any. And we had a whole class. We had started with our junior class here with Parker and Mitch. And then that freshman class after them, there was 12 or 13 club guys in that class. And so we had a lot of youth last year and still do this year, but they work really hard. They get a lot of experience in club. And then the parents are really committed and just great to work with. And so it's really easy to just build the culture when you have everybody buying in. So.
Absolutely. Now, Olentangy Berlin, the program's new, but the school is also new as well. It just opened in 2019, and you're the third head coach of this program, and you're the first to return. What did you learn from last season that you're starting to use this season?
Yeah, last year was actually my first year head coaching. I had helped out before at Kilbourne where I played, and I helped out Westerville North, and I helped at Olentangy when they made a run to states a few years ago. So there was a steep learning curve in terms of just being new to it as a head coach. But again, I think this how hard the guys worked and how great the parents are to work with. Really, just it's more just steering the ship than it is anything that I have to necessarily do. That guys are just really ready to do the right thing, so it makes it easy on me.
So I think you kind of flipped a switch this season with scheduling really competitively. I mean, last season, I think there were a lot more matches that you had a better chance of winning. And this year, you're scheduling some top teams in the state. Can you speak to that decision to make that change?
Yeah, last year our guys played really competitive. We were still D2, and I actually didn't have as much control over the schedule last year because I came in kind of late around Thanksgiving. We had our league schedule set, but at that point it was kind of scrambling to get other games in place. So um, we said kind of to highlight the growth of our program over the last 2 years. Last year we hosted a quad that was Licking Heights, St. Charles's B team, and Hilliard Bradley. And then this year we had St. X and Liberty and St. Ignatius. And so we said that just showed the commitment the guys have to continue to grow and compete. And we'll continue to do that, as long as I'm here and as long as the guys are buying in, we'll schedule tough as we can. So
Yeah. So what are the team goals this season?
yeah, our first goal is always to grow as a team and individually. So it's that growth mindset that we want to keep getting better at whatever we do on and off the court. Our second goal is always team first and just helping your teammates grow and empowering and encouraging them. We believe that if those two things are in place, then success will come in terms of wins and losses. Um, we didn't really set goals in terms of wins and losses this year coming into the season. I think, as you mentioned, now we would like to win an OCC title. We know we're capable of that. So that is a reasonable goal to us at this point. And then beyond that, we would like to make a state run. And we know we're capable of that too. So I think we were kind of waiting to see what our makeup of our team was before we honed in on goals. And now that we know what we're capable of, we have something before us to work towards.
Yeah.
Mhm. Now, when you look at a league such as the OCC, you have so many talented programs like Thomas Worthington, like Derby, like Dublin Jerome. How does it feel to play in a league like this?
Yeah, I think it's great. I mean, you want to compete. You want to compete with the best. Last year we had, as a young team, we had so many great 5-set matches. Almost every night went 5 sets. And so it was fun to compete. I remember last year, the kind of the epitome of the OCC Cardinal was we played Derby and we scored 133 points that game and lost. And I was like, I didn't even know that was possible. So it was something like that where it was more points than you needed to win in 5, and we still lost because every match was 29-27, 31-29. And I think it's fun to compete like that night in and night out and just get better from good competition. I think along with the GCL, it's also fun to kind of be a part of what I think is one of the 2 best leagues in the state. So.
Yeah, I'd absolutely agree. So this is something we talked about at the Berlin Quad, but OCC Challenge, man. Derby puts it on every year where a bunch of OCC teams come and they don't all play each other, but like 2 teams will come and just play one match, but everyone will go and then they'll announce the league awards. Why skip it this year?
I think when they dropped a couple matches and then rescheduled the OCC matches, there was a couple of scheduling things that happened late this year that made it a little more of a challenge schedule wise. We still might have been able to do it, but a late night at Derby towards the end of the season, we just opted to, kind of keep our own schedule and schedule the teams we wanted to out of conference, and just go from there. So it's not something, I mean, we'll kind of evaluate it year to year and see where things are at. It is a great event. It was awesome to see Liberty and Thomas go
That's good.
late in the night. Last year,
24-22 and a set played to 15.
yeah, right.
Crazy.
It was unbelievable. So it is great to see that competition. I'm guessing some of our players, maybe I'll even pop down to see it,
Yeah.
but just schedule wise, we decided that it wasn't necessarily in the best interest of the team this year.
At the very least, you've already played Liberty, you've already played Jerome, you'll play Derby this week. So you'll play everyone you would have seen probably in the matchup there. So
Yeah.
Now, you talked about scheduling out of conference, and like we mentioned earlier, you hosted the Berlin Quad. I saw that what you guys did on Twitter, you were putting out the different, well, you saw our rankings and said, well, these guys are all in the top 10 and they're all coming to Berlin. And those 3 guys were pretty good. St. X, Liberty, Ignatius, and St. X and Liberty just faced off in the final of the Centerville Elite Tournament this past weekend. What was your experience like hosting that quad?
Yeah, it was an honor to have them there at Berlin. I hope it's something we can do again next year. I told our guys though that the work they'd put in over the last 2 years had earned that opportunity as well. And we talk a lot about that the work they put in earns opportunities to, this week to compete with Jerome and with Derby for possibility of an OCC title at some point down. It's still early in the season, but they earn that opportunity to compete for that. They earn the opportunity to compete with high level teams in the state. And so that's our goal, is to keep working hard and create opportunities from that.
yeah, I really liked, I think after the loss to Liberty and X at the quad, you come up to me and you're like, yeah, that's about what we expected. But I really appreciate that coaching mindset. If you can schedule teams that, you're not going to get blown out, but you're probably going to take a competitive loss to, and you're still scheduling them because it's worth the exposure. I think a lot of coaches may schedule a couple like that, but the majority, they're trying to get wins. So I just really appreciated that mindset. This week coming up, you've got 2 big league matches against Jerome and Derby, and then you head to Mount Vernon for a quad with Mount Vernon, Centerville, and Hudson. I I don't know, what's the feeling going into just such a big week like that?
I think it's exciting. We're coming off of spring break here, and we had a great practice Friday. We had a great practice today. So I think we're ready for the week. We're ready to compete. We'll see what happens. But our mindset, as our motto this year, is relentless. And I've told the guys, if they stay relentless every point, compete for every point, the good things are going to happen. And so that's kind of, we're taking it 1 point at a time this week, and see what the turnout is.
Yeah, awesome. Well, yeah, I really appreciate that you keep up with all the rankings and all the teams around the state almost as much as we do, because you texted me like, I think you should consider this team more, and I don't know, I like these guys over here, and I'm like, man, that's exactly what I'm thinking. Thinking the same way. But yeah, it's really cool. Well, thanks so much for coming on, Jim. Been a pleasure having you, and yeah, looking forward to seeing how the Bears do this season.
Yeah, appreciate it, guys. Keep up the good work. The exposure is great for the game and great for the players and the coaches. So we really appreciate it.
That was Jim Cornett. Thanks to him again for coming on. It's funny. After we recorded that, he was talking about 5-setters. He lost in 5 to Jerome, and then 1 in 5 against Darby, just in the time since we've had that interview. So that's pretty incredible. So just a recap of what's been going on recently. St. X beat Elder in 4 on that Friday night. So they were down 10-0 in the first set, and then again down 14-4. Still able to come back and win that first set. Dropped the second set, and then ended up winning in 4. And then, of course, Moeller swept LaSalle. So LaSalle has not won a set of GCL play yet. I don't know if they will. They played everyone once. So, I think the inkling of LaSalle might be good enough this year to do that. It's probably out of the window. Any thoughts on those Friday night matchups?
Yeah, I think I'll start off with St. X Elder. And I was telling you on Monday, just watching that game, especially earlier on, you could tell that St. X was shooting themselves in the foot, and then they were able to right the ship. And I think just being able to come back and win that set, 27-25, and that too against a quality Elder side that, despite not being as potent as they were last year, still a solid squad. And with the Bombers being able to come back and win that first set, it kind of shows their dominance and I think also their versatility. Sometimes the best teams just have some rough goes at it, but at the same time, they're able to rebound and get the victory nonetheless. And that's what happened with St. X, especially in that first set. With Moeller versus LaSalle, I think it was interesting earlier on because it was kind of even as well, especially earlier on in the sets. And then Moeller, I think using their depth and using their stamina, I think that helped them get their victories, and I think helped them get the score lines that occurred, especially that Friday night.
Yeah, I think they utilize their outsides really well. I mean, they have big outsides that most teams, even with a double block, can't stop. So Mo's able to put away most teams that way. That's why they're pretty high up in the rankings. So the Saturday after that, obviously, was the Centerville Elite Eight tournament. So recap of that, St. X won that. They demolished Centerville in the first round. And they did so again this past week when Centerville came to play them separately. Darby actually played them to 5. So what happened was he rested Bentley Meyer, which is their starting outside. He rested him for the first 2 sets, which was good. They went up 2-0. And then Darby won sets 3 and 4, and they had to go to a 5th set in the semifinals of the Elite Eight. So then he put Meyer back in, and they were able to get away with taking that 5th set. And then they took care of Liberty in 3 in the finals. I think X has a very legit shot at going undefeated this season. That was the really big test. I mean, I think last year it was that same 2-day stretch where Elder beat X, and then Elder won the Centerville Elite Eight tournament and beat X again in the finals there. And that was when it was like, okay, Elder's probably the #1 team in the state. And I think that's probably what's going to end up happening here. I think Moeller's really realistically the only one that can knock them off or has the potential to knock them off and give them a loss before the playoffs.
Yeah, I think I have to agree with you there. That matchup, April 14th, the Brisbane Family Center is always an interesting place to play, especially with St. X. You have your away crowd coming in, but at the same time, it's a classic St. X versus Moeller rivalry, and the Crusaders always bring their A game when it comes to attendance. Their players, as well as JVB, JVA, the supporter section in general is always electric over there. I've got the opportunity to call a couple of St. X's games at the Brisbane Family Center. And both of those games were tests. Both of those games, it felt like you had an electric atmosphere. And for the Bombers, especially last year when they pulled off that victory in 4 at Moeller, that was just a statement win for this squad. And I think that is the statement win for them this year, to try to go unbeaten, at least in the regular season. That's kind of your last step of the train to almost being a juggernaut team, or they're kind of showing signs of a juggernaut team right now, but truly being one would be going to the Brisbane Family Center and beating Muller. Should be an interesting game for sure.
Definitely. So Liberty had some very impressive wins against Elder and Moeller, which I was not expecting. I predicted Liberty to sweep Elder, which did happen. And then I predicted Moeller to get past Liberty in 5, but Liberty actually got past them in 4. Now, it's worth noting Ben Haggerty went down in the second set. He should be fine, I would guess. I saw it. It was just a rolled ankle that looked bad. So bad enough to not play the rest of the day, but I'm guessing he'll be okay to come back pretty quickly. So take from that what you will. You'll recall Liberty's already missing their other outside. So they've been playing their whole season without a second outside. It's really just 3 guys on their offense. They have their outside, Caden Whiteside, and their 2 middles, Jack Torson and Jake Cook. Those are the only guys getting kills pretty much. So that's pretty cool. It was very impressive wins that they had there. Derby, they beat Ignatius in 3, and then they went 5 with St. X, which we talked about, and then they went to the consolation 3rd place round, and they lost to Moeller in 5. And Bell told me, Evan Bell, coach of Hilliard Derby, told me they were missing their OH2 and their MH2 for that. So they're a team to watch out for too, I think. I think that was kind of an awakening moment.
I think the biggest surprises for me is just the Central region definitely showing up in the form of Liberty making it to the final. I mean, it's something to pull off 2 wins against Elder and Moeller, 2 GCL teams, and then you face the other 3rd juggernaut GCL team in the final in the form of St. X. So kudos to Olentangy Liberty and what they've done this season. They're definitely moving up our rankings, which we'll get to later. And then even Derby, just looking at how they kind of had a little bump in the road before the tournament and then able to get some statement results, although not being St. X, but still pushing that team to 5 is something special, and then backing it up with some results as well.
Absolutely. So looking at St. Ignatius, who lost to Derby, they've been hurt for a while. Ever since the Berlin quad, they lost their setter. I think they experimented with having a freshman set, didn't go as they wanted. So they have Sam Brown as their outside setting for them. And, I think they went 2-1 at the Elite Eight tournament. I believe they got 5th. But then they got swept by Hudson. And, I like what Hudson's doing. They're 7-0, but man, that is just not the same St. Ignatius team that I saw at the Berlin quad that took X to 4, one of only 3 teams so far to take a set off of X and beat Liberty in 5. It's just not the same team that we're seeing there. So we'll see what happens. I really hope they can get healthy for the playoffs, because I want to see a fully healthy Ignatius team. I think that team is a top 5 team. But as of right now, Hudson looks like the better team with the injuries they have. DeSales hosted a try match with St. Vincent St. Mary and Bishop Fenwick. And St. Vincent St. Mary is number 2. DeSales is number 1. DeSales took care of them in 4, and they took care of Fenwick in 3. And then St. Vincent St. Mary took care of Fenwick in 3. So all chalk there, as we saw. But DeSales has cemented itself as the number 1 in D2 so far.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, DeSales just keeps on rolling. I think I go back to what you talked about in our first ever episode, where the odds were like 10,000 to 1 for DeSales to win the state title. And we've been seeing that this entire season, and this quad especially, or rather this try definitely backs it up, where you beat St. Vincent St. Mary's, that too in a convincing fashion. And the same goes for a Fenwick team that has also faced some stern competition, as they faced Moeller earlier in the season, and they also faced Elder this week. I mean, just seeing that type of competition overall, I think further tells me the fact that DeSales is definitely pulling away as the favorite in this state title run.
All right. I do think they will win a state championship, but I wanted to correct you. The comment I made 10,001 was them getting out of the central region. So that's different. Yeah. Okay. Because that would be quite the clip.
Yeah.
So speaking of Derby and the OCC Cardinal, Jerome beat Derby in 5 the Friday night before the Centerville Elite Eight tournament. And that was actually the first time in school history that Dublin Jerome beat Hilliard Derby. I thought that was pretty cool, considering they've both been around for a while. course, you'll remember Darby had like 20 straight titles before COVID. It was basically the thing that broke their streak. So yeah, pretty cool that Jerome got that win. And then Jerome beat Berlin in 5 Tuesday night, and then Berlin came around and beat Darby in 5 Thursday night, which was earlier tonight. So that's pretty big wins. It's pretty wide open in the OCC Cardinal. I kind of thought that either Darby or Berlin would start to run away with it. I didn't anticipate Jerome being in the mix, but it looks like it's all three. It's anyone's game right now. Beaver Creek was beaten by Lakota East in 4, which is a little troubling for them. I think they were unbeaten before that, and it just swept Elder. But now, see, I'm not totally sure where to put them. And then Lakota East had some good wins, but then also Lakota East took a bad loss in 3 to McNick. So I'm not totally sure what to do with that. I think Beaver Creek and Lakota East are both hovering around the bottom of the top 10 right now. We'll see what happens with that. And then very big news that Sycamore beat Elder in 5 and Walnut Hills in 5. Now, what are you thinking about Sycamore right now?
I think this team could be onto something. Now, I will say they're not in my top 10 for this week, but they're definitely in the honorable mention category. Like you mentioned, you beat Elder in 5, you beat Walnut Hills in 5. They also beat Roger Bacon in 5 earlier this week as well. It definitely shows the type of talent they have, especially at home, where they're really starting to establish themselves in that setting once again. And I think in terms of GMC play, the only team that, in my opinion, could really challenge them is maybe Lakota East. But then again, Sycamore beat the Thunderhawks at Sycamore. I believe that game was also in 5 earlier this year. So for me, Sycamore once again showing themselves as the favorites in the GMC. My biggest question for Sycamore is what can they do next week? Because they've got some interesting schedules ahead. They've got some interesting opponents. I believe they have both Moeller and St. X on the road. St. X on the road will be their final game of the year, May 4th, and I believe they'll play Moeller next week. So there's still different opportunities for Sycamore to try to get something. And I think if they can take a set off of Moeller, especially at Brisbane, that definitely puts them in the top 10. It shows that they're competitive, and it also shows that this team has grown a lot since their regional final appearance against Elder. I was actually on the call for that game last year, and it just seemed that Sycamore seemed out of it. You know, they were second best in many categories, and I don't blame them. Elder's just a really good team, but it seems like if they can go on the road and be competitive, at the very least, keep sets close, maybe to 2 or 3, I think this team could be really onto something into getting into the top 10 and maybe even making a run when we get to the regionals.
Yeah, I saw them at the Wittenberg tournament over the summer, and if I remember correctly, they basically graduated everyone except Owen Walsh, who's their big middle. So I wasn't expecting anything out of them this year. Apparently, they've got a good right side though, so props to them for giving a good run and beating a team like Elder in 5. That's pretty impressive. I'd say for me, they're sniffing around my top 10 right now.
And the teams that are in the hunt, doesn't matter what network we work for, that's the only phrase that anybody's ever come up for with that.
See if we can't change that by next week.
Sniffing around.
Yeah.
I think, like you said, if they can keep it competitive with Moeller, I don't think they need to win against Moeller, but if they can just keep it somewhat competitive and not take a really bad loss, I think they're worth looking at for the top 10. Looking into our D1 rankings here, we both thought the same thing for the top 4. Both have St. X at number 1, Liberty at number 2, Moeller at number 3, and Mount Vernon at number 4. Pretty cool that Liberty was able to get past Moeller and get into the number 2 spot. I didn't think that anyone was going to crack that top 2, but here we are. I think how the OCC Cardinal matches shook out kind of altered my thinking for the following teams. I know I was going to have Darby at 4 and then Mount Vernon at 5 directly after the Centerville Elite 8, but because of how things worked out, Jerome has the more recent head-to-head win over Berlin, and they have the head-to-head win over Darby. Berlin has the head-to-head win over Darby and the head-to-head loss from Jerome, and Darby has head-to-head losses from both. So that's how I figured 5, 6, and 7. And then I think I just had Hudson down there for eye test. I just from looking at the film of them against Ignatius, I think that they are a slightly worse team than those 3. So I have Hudson and then Ignatius. And then I think, honestly, Ignatius, when they're healthy, is a top 5 team. But right now, it's kind of an issue with being injured so long. You get kind of worried about development and, not being able to run your starting lineup and build the connection. So I'm going to put them at 9 until they prove to me they deserve to go back up, which I think they will. But for now, I'm going to keep that there.
Looking at mine, I mean, like you said, the top 4 remains the same. I'm actually going to put Hudson at 5. I kind of was also in a quandary depending on what we were going to see from Berlin and Derby on Thursday. And I think for me, Derby once again losing another game at home, another OCC game at home. I think they dropped down to 6. If they would have won, I probably would have put them at 4. And then I think Hudson is also in that kind of in the middle of that category overall. There's going to be an interesting quad at Mount Vernon. They're going to have some interesting tests. I believe they're playing the Yellow Jackets. They'll also play Berlin and then Centerville that weekend, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep.
And I have to agree with you on Ignatius. It just seems like their team just seems off, especially in the front. I was watching that game and it just seemed like Hudson's front line just seemed to just dominate them at the net and also just in many aspects of the game, even in terms of communication. I still think Elder deserves to be in that spot, just knowing how they might have played in the elite tournament. Sure, they did not beat Derby and then they lost to Ignatius, but this is still a solid side that is battle tested and is still filled with some players that are definitely starting to grow throughout the season, as Coach Tierney talked about with us a few weeks ago. But I have to give credit to Olentangy Berlin. I remember what Coach Jim talked about earlier this week with us in the fact that this team is just playing just great competition and some of these matches are going to crazy extents, but at the same time, when you have these games going to 5 sets, they're always competitive. Sure, this team lost to Jerome, but they follow it up on Thursday on the road, beating Derby in 5. They definitely deserve to be in the top 10. I still think there's still some work to do, and I think some GCL bias comes into it as to why Elder is better than both Berlin and Jerome. But I still think it's great to see Jerome in the top 10. They definitely deserve it after the type of shift they've put up.
Yeah, absolutely. I think for Ignatius, it's not really their fault, right? I mean, I think if you take any team and you remove their setter and you take their best outside hitter and put him at setter, they're going to get a lot worse. So it's not like, I don't know. It's not like they're doing anything wrong. It's just unfortunate that they can't get healthy. I think it's Coach Dom told me 1 more 2 weeks and they'll have their setter back. So hopefully he'll be back for their Mount Vernon quad and they'll have a chance to prove that they belong in the top 5. I think when they're fully healthy, they can get there again, but we'll see about that. Honestly, I think I have to take issue with where you put Elder because they're 8 and 6 right now, right? 4 of the teams that beat them, you have above them, but then Sycamore and Beaver Creek aren't in the top 10, but Elder's in the top 10. I don't know if I can support that line of reasoning.
Yeah, I think for me, it just comes down to competition. It is an interesting point you make, but just compared to the type of scheduling that Sycamore has faced, the type of scheduling that some guys like Beaver Creek, I mean, sure, they've had less losses than Elder, but I think
less losses, they beat Elder.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, you do have a point, I think, there, but I still think this team is still competitive. Maybe 8 is a little bit too lenient. Maybe Berlin and Jerome need to be higher, but I get what you're saying. But
yeah.
Again, it just seems like maybe it's a point of bias, like I said before, but I think maybe Elder's a team that doesn't deserve to be there. And again, that will be another question that will be asked next week.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on how much you read into, like they lost to Liberty and they lost to Beaver Creek. Both were Saturday morning matches right after a Friday match. So I don't know. It depends on how much you read into stuff like that. So we'll see. I think Elder will be able to prove whether or not they belong there in their coming weeks. They've got some more competitive teams. So we'll see how that goes. So for the D2 rankings, personally, mine did not change at all. Every team that I had as better than another team, everything worked. Everything was all chalk. All the teams that were supposed to win won, and all the teams that were supposed to lose lost. So I don't know. I know you made a couple changes. Do you want to talk about those?
Yeah, I think for me, It just goes to the fact that, like I said, Roger Bacon lost to Sycamore in 5. Again, I don't think, despite Sycamore being D1, I just don't see that team being in the situation where if you lose to that team, let's say like if Roger Bacon loses to a team like, I don't know, like LaSalle or Moeller in 5, you can easily say, you know what, it's a competitive loss, and we'll give them credit for that. With Sycamore, I can't necessarily make that argument. That loss does feel like a loss, despite Sycamore being in D1 and could be knocking on the door of our top 10 in that division. So that just drops Roger Bacon down to 7, in my opinion. And then Taylor ended up having an interesting battle against Roger Bacon, lost to them in 3, but it was pretty competitive down the stretch. The last 2 sets were decided by a couple points. So that's why I think Taylor heads into my top 10 after just that result over the weekend. And I think it's a little bit more competitive than what we've been seeing out of Chaminade Julienne this year, where it just seems like they're not getting the results, aka they're not getting wins when it really matters in those competitive games.
Yeah, I think I see your point there. Personally, when I look at D2 teams, I don't really like to count D1 losses to D1 teams against them unless they're particularly bad. But like I know DeSales lost to Darby, and I think they have a couple of D1 losses. But in terms of the competition they'll face in the state tournament for D2, it doesn't really matter. They're still clearly the best team in D2. So I get your point though. But Roger Bacon does still have the head-to-head win over Baden in 5. So I think that I'll keep them there until that they prove to me they shouldn't be there. So yeah, I don't know. Pretty uneventful so far in D2, I'd say, but a couple little alterations. All right, and with that, this has been Ohio VolleyTalk. Mahir, any final thoughts?
Not much, just the fact that we've seen some good competition. We'll see some this weekend, although it's a lighter load, and then definitely next week things are going to really start to pick up.
Yep, some good events. This Saturday there's the Mount Vernon quad with Berlin, Hudson, and Centerville, and Mount Vernon, so that'll be good. A lot of interesting stuff, and season's kind of flying by. It feels like it was just week 1 yesterday, but this has been Mahir and I from Ohio VolleyTalk, and we'll catch you next week.